I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not speaking meaningfully about anything, okay? Because I don't know what the words I'm using are referencing.
And I guess the thing that I'm kind of objecting to, or the inconsistency that I'm pointing out, is why is it the case that we have no morally sufficient reason for understanding these kinds of evils, but then we have like very clear, precise understanding of what God's exact intentions and plans are when it comes to like whether or not we should give the death penalty to Franklin Floyd, right? Like that just seems very asymmetric in a particular respect, and I think that it's very unclear why there would be that kind of asymmetry. Because
is this a question, or is this a problem, or is
this is a problem.
question?
This is a problem.
So,
this is a
but
problem.
it has to be more than a question, right? Because there are certain things we do know, there's certain things we don't know. What's the problem here?
No. Okay.
I'm failing.
So what,
I am failing to see the problem. I'm failing.
Okay. Well, I'll assist you then. So
okay.
The issue is that it seems like the way in which you're repelling the like why did God allow my 10-year-old to be raped is, well, this could all be a part of God's plan and we don't really know.
Everything that happens is a part of God's plan.
Right. Like God has morally
us talking right now is a part of God's plan.
Okay, well, God has morally
someone
sufficient...
giving to charity is a part of God's plan.
Okay, yeah. Well, God has morally sufficient reasons for allowing this to occur, right? And then what I'm saying is, I'm like, okay, but
what do you mean by morally sufficient reason? What do you mean by that?
Like in the grand scheme of things, there are reasons that outstrip the reasons for not allowing it to occur. Like, so we only see things.
I don't know what that means. All my position is that God allows these things to happen. Okay, those actions are still bad in virtue of the fact that they are out of accord with God's prescriptive desires are and prescriptive will is. But God's overall plan of human history will be achieved. So I don't know what else the other stuff you're talking about is.
Okay, I'm just gonna make a brief. I'm going to make a brief point about this, and then I'm going to kind of continue my original case. The brief point that I'm going to make about this is that it seems as though there is an asymmetric appeal to divine psychology that is sort of misplaced.
What do you mean asymmetric? There are things that we do know. There are things that we don't know. God has chosen.
But like, how could you know if God's plan is,
not to reveal certain things.
Okay, yeah, but if God's plan is utterly mysterious, then
I don't even know what that means. What do you mean it's utterly mysterious? God has revealed certain things about His plan. Like everything that has happened in history has been a part of God's plan, so we know that much. Plus other things that God has revealed to us about things in the future. Plus certain things about what God wants to happen in certain circumstances and what God does not want. There are plenty of things that we know about God's plan. It's not utterly mysterious to the fact that we don't know absolutely anything about God's plan. We know certain things about God's plan, and then there are plenty of other things that we don't know about God's plan. But where is the contradiction? Where is the problem? Because I don't have a problem with not knowing what God.
No. So what? No, it's the appeal to divine psychology in particular circumstances where it appears as though, for instance, we might have Bible passages where certain actions seem impermissible. Okay, so like rape or torture or things of this kind. Okay, like suppose and. When I say, well, here's this passage, and then here's this event, God clearly doesn't like this according to the Bible. Why did it happen? And then what you'll be like is, oh, well, this is part of God's plan. This is fine. And so you appeal to this.
No, hold on, stop.
Or like that's why
part of God's plan. It doesn't make it morally fine. It doesn't. Sorry.
So God allow. Okay, well, we could go into a whole problem of evil discussion here. I think that my point.
But it's not going to go anywhere. I'm sorry, it's not going to go anywhere.
I think that the point is sufficiently made, which is that there's an asymmetric appeal to divine psychology, where it's like I know the mind of God when it's convenient for me, but when it's not convenient for me, I sort of like throw my hands up.
It has nothing to do with convenience.
Well, how do you know? Well, how do you know that God wants? How do you know that it's permissible for collateral damage to occur? Well, no. How do you know it's permissible for collateral damage to occur in Operation Desert Storm under the Clinton administration, but you don't know whether or not, like on the grand scheme of things, it was bad for like my 10-year-old to get raped? Why is there
everything that happens? I'll say this again for the 5th time, Roger. Everything that happens, everything, good or bad, when it comes to God's prescriptive will, is a part of God's sovereign decree, sovereign will. Ultimately, everything that happens. Okay, so there's nothing that I would say I don't know whether or not it's a part of God's. Everything that is happening is with accords to God's permissive will. There's nothing that happens with respect to God's permissive will that God did not ultimately want to happen. There's nothing in that within that realm.
So
God wanted
the 10-year-old to be raped.
With respect to, if you're talking about want with respect to his permissive will, yeah, he allows that to happen. Yeah.
No. I didn't say allows.
Hold on a second.
I said want.
See,
what do you mean by want?
No, I mean, he wanted it to happen because he thought it was on balance a morally good thing.
No, I didn't say that's not. No, so that's why again you're putting. Don't put words in my mouth. I know that's good. It's good that you're asking me.
No.
But just make sure, because you've been kind of slipping certain things in this whole conversation that I haven't agreed to, and I had to stop you. Right.
Well, okay. So do you think that? Okay, I could do this dialectically. Do you think that God wants to actualize a world, the totality of which maximizes the amount of morally good things there are?
Not necessarily, because like there are people who reject God, and ultimately, with respect to God's ultimate plan, that rejection of God is not a good thing.
Okay.
But like the ultimate justice that's going to be occurring, right? The justice of those against those people is good, but everything that happens in the God's ultimate, with respect to the world that God has created and everything that will happen at the end of it, every event that happens in that world is not morally good, obviously.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I feel like there's so much I could unpack there, but I feel like it's going to take me too far.
Look, this whole time.
No, yeah. So let's go back to the original case. Let's go back to the original. There are a lot.
So Roger, before you start on that long thing, may I ask you a couple of questions in exchange? Right, I'm going to make a simple argument against the problem of evil, and I'd like you to respond. Would you agree that all moral propositions, whether you're moral realist or not, will entail another consequence, and that consequentialism is never ending? If I look at the outer set of all the predicates of all possible moral outcomes, spanning past your life and the age of the universe, would you agree that that's not knowable by any one person in point in space and time? Agreed?
I'm going to be totally honest. You sound very echoey, so
sorry about the echoey, Debbie.
It's a little difficult to understand you completely.
Let me try again. So, if you agree that for all moral propositions starting right now, there'll be an entailment, and that entailment will continue in a chain of moral consequences, and would you agree that as the entire universe runs out, way past your life, that no human being at any point in time can understand the net effect of all moral decisions? Would you agree with that proposition?
That no human being could understand them. Yeah, sure.
Great.
Sure.
So therefore, God's plan is that the final arbiter of what is good and bad is a function that determines what the absolute good is. Any particular snapshot view of that would never be sufficient, and therefore there is no problem of evil. All a Christian has to do is fall back on the God's omniscience.
Yeah. Right. So no, I know. Yeah. So I'll address this briefly, and then we'll go back to what I was originally trying to raise with J. Robin. But with the specific point that you're bringing up, I think that there are like two main issues. Maybe the second issue isn't as powerful as the first, but the first is that I think that this kind of really begins to dangerously tip into territory that we don't want it to. So if we look at events and we say, for instance, like I'll pick something that's easy, right? And we look at the Holocaust. Say, like, look, this is just morally terrible. And then the skeptical theist is like, well, like, you know, on balance, we can't really know if it was terrible because we don't see the full movie from beginning to end. We only see a snapshot. So making any judgments is like quite difficult. So I think that it sort of robs us of our ability to attribute moral valence to particular actions, because in the grand scheme of things, we could never know whether or not any particular event is good or bad.
Sorry to interrupt you, not true.
The goodness or the badness of the event.
Sorry to interrupt you, not true. They're not true. Only moral valence within that window. So let me run with your example. The Holocaust was bad. We condemn the Holocaust, but a positive consequence is the security and the formation of the State of Israel.
Okay, that's really contentious.
So the question again, so you're not really defeating my argument. All you're doing is sliding your time window.
No. Okay, no. I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's true. So what you're saying, I'll just respond directly. So I think that, when you say, well, no, the Holocaust was wrong. I mean, so you are one of those humans that can't look at the whole story from front to back. So how could you possibly know whether or not, if you really accept what you're saying, how could you possibly know whether or not the Holocaust was on balance a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, because you don't have access to the same knowledge that God does.
Correct. So all I have to do is a proxy that God knows and we can't know.
So you're telling me you can't know whether or not the Holocaust was bad? No,
I can judge any moral act in its basis as an act, but I can't judge the entire set of all acts.
No. Okay, yeah. So, okay, again, what I'm trying to say is, like, ceteris paribus, if we look at the Holocaust,
What is ceteris paribus? Roger. Okay, this is very simple. It's not complicated. Okay, very simple. We can talk in plain English here. We can talk in normal English. Okay, you're smart. I get it. Congratulations. Okay, now look, the very simple position here is not, and I haven't seen a contradiction. I haven't seen a problem this whole time. Exactly what Curing said. Exactly what I've been saying this whole time. The action can be judged as morally good or morally bad with respect to whether or not it's in accordance with what God has prescriptively decreed should or should not happen with respect to his prescriptive will. Okay, when we say that something is when you say that something is good or bad in another sense, when it comes to God's sovereign decrees or his overall permissive will, then everything that happens, if you're saying it's in accordance with that, is good, because
maybe this is a better question.
Good, you mean it's in accordance with that?
Okay.
Then
in what sense? Okay, this is a better question. In what sense was the Holocaust good?
Insofar as it contributed to God's overall plan. That's what goodness is.
Okay, right. So I think that's QED. I don't think I have anything further to say about that.
What is QED? What do you say?
QED is what you say at the end of a mathematical proof.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyway, QED. I think that if that's what your view entails, then it's absurd. Okay.
What's absurd about it?
If you think that the Holocaust was good because God commanded it to be good, or that God willed it to be good.
I didn't say that either.
Okay, well then what could you possibly mean? I mean, like,
I already explained
God,
it to you.
God. Well, no. So it's a part of God's permissive will in the sense that God permitted it to happen.
The only thing good means so don't divorce good from any other conception of good that you may have, other than the one I'm about to tell you. If by good you simply mean it's in accordance with God's prescriptive will or permissive will, and everything that happens is just good. By good, you just mean everything that is happening and everything that will happen. If that's how you're defining the word good, then everything is good. Okay? Now, we may have a different conception of good in many other circumstances, but that's the only way in which good is meant when we're talking about God's permissive will. We're not saying that anything is in accords with God's prescriptive will in that kind of sense. That's not what good means in the sense I've just used it.
Okay, so there are things to come in here, and I think that, like, the broader point that I sort of just want to make, and then I really want to return to the original argument, because this is probably a sidetrack that I even brought up this objection, is to say that I think that the problem of evil becomes an issue again the second you invoke divine psychology. And Kevin Sharp has made this point in his debate with Craig, but the moment you invoke knowing what God would do or what God wouldn't do or what he thinks or what he doesn't think, then I think that the non-believer is totally justified in bringing in the problem of evil. But if you maintain,
I haven't heard a single contradiction this whole time. How long has this been up? It's been up for over 30 minutes, almost coming up to an hour. It's been up for 40 minutes, and I haven't heard a single contradiction. You keep telling me the problem of evil, and I've explained to you that there is no contradiction. You haven't presented the P and not P, and you keep circling back around to it.
Right? No. Okay.
So like, what am I supposed to think, Roger? What am I supposed to think right now?
Okay. Yeah. All right. So this is the idea. First of all, in philosophy, it's not like every argument results in some kind of contradiction at the conclusion, and therefore
I don't have a problem.
That's not how it works.
I'm still a Christian. Look, at the end of the day,
I'm bringing up attention.
Roger, at the end of the day, I'm a Christian. I don't see any tension. Right? You're talking to me, right? You're talking to me and potentially to the other Christians in the room.
Yeah,
I don't see any tension.
I don't have a problem. I don't see a tension. That's a psychological factor.
Roger, you haven't explained the tension. I've actually explained my position to you clearly. I've explained where you were faulty in either your mischaracterizations of me, my position, where you may have misunderstood what I hold to be true with respect to the problem of evil, who God has revealed. Okay, so I don't see a problem. You haven't made that clear. So the only problem here is with you and your how you're purveying the problem here. You haven't done so successfully.
Okay, no, the way in which
unsuccessful.
No, I mean, again, I think I've made it as clear as I can.
Okay, so let's do this without any of the special fancy jargon, without any of the
Sure. Okay, this is what I'm trying to say. So I'll set up the dialectic from the beginning. Basically, originally you said God revealed to me that we don't have the innate authority. So you clarified that God gave us the authority to take life. And then I responded with a very common objection in the literature, which is like, if you really think that, then self-defense becomes very difficult to explain, and so do other things. And then what you said was, well, okay, hang on, I'm summarizing my point. Then you said, well, actually, no, because God revealed to me that in these special circumstances I can do this. And then what I said in response was, first of all, I'm not sure this argument from Revelation is really going to be as powerful as we think it is, because there are Christians that are as Christian as you are, that are as knowledgeable about the Bible as you are, but that have revelations in the opposite direction. And so the question is like, how do we adjudicate on matters like that? Because it seems as though there are passages that each of us could pull up that would point in both directions, and I don't think that we're going to settle the matter in that way. And so then on a further point, I say, look, I'm not even sure appealing to like God's plan in this kind of way, or like what divine psychology, what God thinks or what God feels is an advisable strategy, because if you do that, then you kind of have to give up this morally sufficient reason repulsion of the problem of evil, which actually may be quite successful, right? It may work. It might actually resolve the problem of evil, and it might be a very good argument for theists. I mean, a lot of atheists are sort of conceding that now. But I think that if you start to invoke divine psychology, it becomes just very murky, and it becomes unclear why the atheist can't do so as well. And so I don't think that's a good strategy for responding to the type of argument that I was bringing originally, which was about threshold Christianity and the permissibility of abortion accordingly. So, yeah.
Okay, so the ultimate problem here is invoking what you would say, what you call divine psychology in God's plan. Is that the ultimate problem here?
Sorry, someone called me. What?
So are we boiling this down to your problem here is the problem of Christians invoking God's plan? Is that the problem?
Yeah, I think that it's not just invoking God's plan. It's invoking God's plan, and then in other areas, sort of tossing up your hands and being like, well, we can never know God's plan. But in these special circumstances, we do. But not when it comes to the Holocaust, we don't know. When it comes to this, we don't know. But when it comes to whether or not I can like drop bombs on the Middle East, yeah, like we have a very clear picture of what's allowed there. Like that just to me seems like a little bit inconsistent.
Okay, so now you're equivocating.
It seems like you get backed into a corner, because you have to say in some feasible way, like the Holocaust was good. Like there's an interpretation of the Holocaust, whether it's permissive or prescriptive or whatever, where you have to say it's good.
Okay, and I think what do you mean by good? What do you mean by good, Roger? Roger, what do you mean by good?
That it, at least in your case, that it maximizes perhaps it satisfies God's preferences.
I didn't say preferences. I said everything that satisfies God's ultimate sovereign decree as a sovereign creator. Everything that happens in the world would be a part of God's permissive
right
will.
So
okay,
right.
So if by good, okay, if it is a case that by good you are referring to the satisfaction of God's permissive will, then everything that happens is good. Okay, if that is what you mean by good. If that's what you mean by good, but you can mean something else by good, in which case I may or may not agree that everything that happens is good. If you mean something else by good, right?
Okay. No. Yeah. I mean.
But so if you want to talk about the Holocaust, if you want to talk about dropping bombs in the Middle East, if you want to talk about giving money to charity, if you want to talk about us talking to each other right now, if you want to talk about me walking down the street to buy something from the store, everything. If you mean by good that is in the satisfaction of God's permissive will, everything is good in that scope. Okay.
So you're thankful for the Holocaust happening then?
I didn't say that. I didn't say so. So again, you're not, again with putting words in my mouth. Again,
no, but like, why wouldn't you be?
Why would I be?
Because it's good.
Why are you putting words in my mouth?
That's part of God's sovereign decree, and everything that's part of God's sovereign decree. Why wouldn't it be good?
Good in what sense? Why would you?
In the sense that
you're just saying why wouldn't something in God's sovereign decree be in God's sovereign decree? That's all you're saying right now.
Okay, well, if your definition of what's good is circular, that seems to be your problem, not my problem.
No, it's not. Good is just a token to
describe a type,
to describe a concept, right?
Okay, so you're basically
something is fulfilling.
Okay.
No, because
okay, I know how to do this.
When you use the word good, right, and when I use the word good, I could talk about many different things, right? The word good can refer to whether or not something is contributing to God's permissive will. It can refer to whether or not something is consistent with God's prescriptive will. It can refer to something else, depending on the context. Okay, so if you're going to say something is good, right? My position is when I say something is good, and in certain senses, I may be saying that something is fulfilling God's ultimate plan, or I may be saying that it's consistent with God's prescriptive will.
Which one? And then okay, and then in the context of the Holocaust, which one was it again?
There are two different In the case of the Holocaust, it's two different definition, or not two different definitions, but it's two different values. So in one case, it wouldn't be good in the sense that it's out of accord with God's prescriptive will, but it would be good in God's permissive will sense.
So it's good because God.
It's not good because it's just good insofar as good is defined as is God's permissive will. There's no because here. I don't know what because means. It's just good is just that which is in accordance with God's permissive will, which is everything.
So there's a sense. So there's a sense in which then, okay, so right. So when you and I talk about what's good or bad, we're talking about prescriptive, is what you're basically saying.
In most circumstances, yeah.
Then what work is permissive will doing? Like if everything's good according to permissive, I mean, then what explanatory power does that have? I mean, if everything is good,
it's with reference to God's sovereignty, the fact that God is sovereign over all of creation.
I mean, but like, what kind of moral explanation does it do?
I don't know. I didn't try to invoke any moral explanation. I just said that everything is happening with reference to God's permissive will.
I guess this is just a very odd concept because it seems
it can be odd to you. That sounds like a psychological problem, Roger. For you. No.
So it seems but like as in but there's like a rational issue here.
Okay,
the rational issue is that you're saying that there's a sense in which because God permitted the Holocaust and it's a part of His permissive will, then it's good. And it works as a.
I didn't say because it's like again.
It's a predicate.
Good is just.
It's an implicated predicate. So you're saying for all X, if X is a part of God's permissive will, then X is good. There exists an X such that X is a Holocaust and that X is part of God's permissive will. Therefore, the Holocaust is good. That would be that's the form of your argument, logically speaking. You would use universal existential instantiation, and then that's just it. But the weird thing about that is the conclusion. It logically follows from those first two statements that the Holocaust would be good. Like that's
like, good in what sense?
Okay, tell me where you disagree. For all X.
What do you mean by good? I just want to know. What do you mean by good?
What I mean is that God permitted, like it's morally advisable.
We already agreed. Like, so the Holocaust is good insofar as it's permitted by God. Yeah.
I don't even know if there's anything more I need to say. If
yeah, okay. I didn't say it was morally good. I didn't say that killing people was in accordance with God's prescriptive will. So I don't see the problem here.
I think any of this other stuff is irrelevant. If you can't find a contradiction, then I think that's
I don't see any tension. I don't see any contradiction. I don't see any problem here that I should be considering.
It just it makes you countenance a very counterintuitive.
No, it doesn't. No, it does not.
Okay, I mean, I'll leave that to I'll leave other people to adjudicate on whether or not you having to say that. There's a certain sense in which the Holocaust was good.
You're talking to me, right? You're talking to me, Roger. No, because by
right,
good,
but you're never going to concede on anything.
Roger. Good does not refer to whether or not something is morally with respect to God's prescriptive will. That's not what we're saying. That's not what good means here, right? So all we're saying is something is good. It's occurring, really. We're just saying it's good. That means it's occurring. It's a part of God's overall permissive will. If that's what by good means, there's not controversial to anyone. So there's no countenance. There's nothing that needs to be countenance here. Or whatever,
right.
Like there's no tension here.
Right. I mean, the tension is that you're saying that everything that is permitted is good, but then when I challenge
everything that's permitted is permitted. Everything that's permitted is permitted. Yeah.
Right, but that's just a meaningless statement. That statement's meaningless, right?
No, it's not. Oh, no, it is not.
A is not meaningless. A is a tautology.
Roger. I don't say. I just say when I say it's good, I will say it's good. What I mean by good is that it's referring to the fact of the matter that it's fulfilling God's sovereign decree. So we can use the word good, or we can use the word as sovereign decree. We don't need, but you're using the words in like the same sentence in a circular kind of fashion, or you're trying to equivocate between what good means in this sense and what good might mean in another sense, and that's the problem you're running into.
I mean, so you're saying that what is permitted is a non-tautological statement.
I don't say what is permitted is good. I just say that God is, I say it's good insofar, or good as defined as it is a part of God's overall sovereign plan. That's what I say.
So everything.
That's what I said this whole time.
So everything.
Yeah, yeah. And if that's how you're defining good, I already made that statement already.
But you don't define good that way.
I define good in that context. Yeah, I define good in other ways. I have multiple different definitions of good as you do.
No. I mean,
you might have different.
Okay, so then how do you know which one to? So when you see a child being raped, are you like, well, which sense of the word good do I apply here?
No, you can use both. You can use both senses of good. Something could be out of accord of God's. Something could be good in one sense and not good in the other sense. It's very easy to judge because God has revealed what is good in one sense and what is good in the other sense. So it's very easy in many circumstances to judge those two things that just have different definitions of good, and you can apply them.
So is there a sense in which abortion is good because God permits it?
Good is just everything that God permits. Again, so
abortion. So abortion is good then, right?
Abortion is permitted. Yeah.
No. But everything that's permitted is good. You said that before.
You see how you're talking?
Yeah,
so
but you want to use. But look, this is the point. This is the dishonesty. This is the dishonesty because you want to use the word good. You want to use the word good because you know that many people have a different conception of the word good. So you don't want to use like the exact same. It's the exact same thing.
Bro, but he's being deceptive in how he's speaking. He's
right,
like,
I know.
Abortion is
Everyone
good.
knows that. Everyone it's so easy to see. It's so easy to see.
The way he's saying it like comes out as an oversimplification.
No, he realizes that everyone not everyone, but like a lot of, like in general speak, right? The word good has a much different meaning than what we're using in this conversation. So he wants to keep using the word good. He wants to keep using the word good for the sake of the audience, for the sake of everyone else, to kind of hide around this.
Did you say that good? Did you say that good and permitted?
Yes, I did. They are the
right.
same thing. That's why. That's why.
Right.
No, but listen, Roger. You're not this stupid. You realize that the word good has many different meanings, and most of the time good is not used to refer to this, right? And so when you use the word good, in the minds of many people, in the minds of maybe yourself, in the minds of the audience, a lot of times it may revert to a more traditional understanding of good or a more common understanding of good. It's not the one that we're using here. So it has nothing to do with my clarity of defining the words. It has to do with the proclivity for people to associate the word good with something that is not being talked about here. Okay.
Wait,
so we can just say it is in accord with God's permissive will and leave it at that because that's what we mean by good anyways.
But you said that
use the word good.
You said what's
the word good because
here's basically what I believe Roger is doing. It'll be like if we're having a conversation about someone who was raped, right? And this person dealt with the emotional scars of rape. But here's the thing: they took that experience to impact other people in a positive way. And to be an inspiration to others on how they can, go forward in life, how they can find healing, all that good stuff. And then you turn around and say, well, so rape is good. That's exactly what that's like.
Okay,
obviously.
Great. I think that this is, okay.
Obviously what we're doing is we're saying there are things that are morally prescriptively bad. But then when you say, well, so rape is good, even though what they went through prescriptively was bad. You see what you're doing right there? You're being very slippery with your language.
Well, I mean,
I don't think
I'm being.
No one's saying abortion's good.
I mean, on other moral theories, right? You don't have this distinction between prescriptive and permissive.
I don't care about other moral theories.
Goodness. So, I'm not being slippery because I don't have this concept of permissive goodness, right? So I don't understand why.
Sir, stop.
It seems like you're.
I don't care about stop. I don't care about other moral theories. I just care about the simple point I made to you. Like if I tell you someone can use their experience of a horrific situation like rape to impact others positively, and then you say, "Well, so rape is good." Don't you see how disingenuous that is?
Well, I mean, I noticed Bodey came up high. No,
stop. Answer my question. Don't you see how disingenuous that is?
Again, I think that it might be an implication of your view. So I don't know. To me, it would be disingenuous. On my worldview, it would be disingenuous. I don't know on your worldview if it would be disingenuous or not.
Yeah, this is just.
This is effectively what you're doing. You're not taking into account.
Okay.
You know what, man? I think it's quite obvious what you're trying to do here. I think it's quite obvious that you're just trying to purposely make mountains out of molehills. Because the bottom line is this: unless you can find a necessary contradiction in the existence of evil or rape or any things like this occurring, you just don't have an argument. You just don't have a case. It's really that simple.
Okay. Yeah, I have no problem with being a Christian after this conversation. Like, there's nothing you've given me to think about at all.
Okay, nothing. Sure. I mean, there are other things, but I think sticking to this point is kind of interesting. We can move on to a different topic, or like go back to the original topic that we were kind of going into, because I've crystallized some of my thoughts there. But I think that really the critical point here is that previously in the conversation, you said there's a sense of the word good that is synonymous with permissive will. So, in a sense, the Holocaust was good. And I'm saying, well, in that same sense, abortion would be good. And then there was like this resistance, which was like, no, that's very
I
disingenuous.
didn't say no. I didn't say no. No, this is what I said.
So
I
yes,
said,
yes.
No, Roger, again, don't put words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth. Please don't do that. What I said, when you asked me, is abortion good? I said, abortion is in accordance with God's permissive will. And then you wanted to say, oh, don't you mean good? And I was like, well, aren't they the same thing? Why can't I say the word permissive will? Why can't I use
Right,
the
they're
word?
the same
And
thing.
then I made the point that is so obvious. Okay, Helen Keller could see it. Okay, with her eyes. Okay, you are intentionally using the word good in a way that it may seem to other people who are just listening, who may have just joined, to people who are listening, just anyone who's listening, because you're trying to do this as a rhetorical device anyway. You're trying to get other people to kind of quote unquote see the absurdity that isn't there, but you're trying to get them to see some absurdity that you hold that my position has. Okay, which is by using the word good. You're not saying it, but the word good has a different definition than what we're using it in. Right. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing clarity. I'm saying, okay, yeah, if you want to use the word good as it's been defined, I can use the term I define the word good as perfectly fine. And you don't need to give pushback against it, which you did. And I'm wondering why you did that.
Well,
Because
I
I'm the
did
one who
that.
defined it.
I did that because, as you just said, the sense in which you're describing good.
Yeah, so everything is within. I don't really use the word good here. I mean, when I say like the Bible says that everything that happens is for the good of those who love him, right? So we're saying that everything is ultimately going to be according to God's sovereign plan, right? So in a few circumstances, we're using the word good with respect to God's sovereign plan, but most of the cases, but most of the time, like even the things that God allows to happen in that verse, right? It says that God, everything that happens is for the good of those who. Though everything that happens isn't good in another sense, obviously, right? There's
Right.
persecution. There's things that are happening that are bad.
Right.
So when the Bible uses the word good in that sense, it's not saying that they're good, right?
Why are they bad?
This is kindergarten. This is kindergarten.
Why are they bad?
Like this is obvious, right? Okay, they're bad insofar as they're out of accords with God's prescriptive will. Okay, that's what the word.
So they're out of accord with what God prescribes. Okay, but they're good in the sense that God allows it, and what God allows is good. Or like in what part of its permissive will, if you will.
They're good. If by good you're talking about God's exercise of his sovereign control over the world, then every exercise of God, the act of God exercising his sovereignty in every moment is good. In that sense.
Okay. So,
can I?
Yeah, Brody. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. What he was saying before was there are two senses of good. There's one sense which is permissive, and there is another sense that's prescriptive. It wasn't, okay, well, if we define it as permissive, then it's going to be like this. There are two active senses of good, so it's like this pluralistic concept. As opposed to like if you were to have some like really hedonic consequentialist view where there's only like a monistic conception of the good. This is like a pluralistic conception. And what I'm saying is that means that there must be a sense in which this is good, and that just seems counterintuitive.
The reason is counterintuitive. Again, the reason is counterintuitive is because you're importing another definition of good that was not at all present in my definition of good. That's the only reason it's counter. And I told you that's what you're trying to exploit when you're trying to use the word good and trying to push back against me when you want to say that certain things are good. The only reason it's counterintuitive to you is because you're not using the definition of good that I gave you. That's the only reason it's counterintuitive.
I don't really think that's true.
No, it's not. Is it counterintuitive to say Is it counterintuitive to say that things that are happening and that are there in accordance with God's sovereign will, assuming that Christianity is true? Is that counterintuitive at all?
Well, I mean, I think that's why there's
What is counterintuitive about What is counterintuitive about saying that everything that happens is in accordance with God's sovereign will? What is counterintuitive about that?
Because little children got gassed in a gas chamber, and that's what's counterintuitive about it. That's why there's a problem with evil.
What is counterintuitive about saying that God lets it happen? It's a part of God's sovereign will. What is counterintuitive about that? Where is this opposed tension or contradiction here about saying that
I'm not saying.
Okay, so what do you mean? What do you mean by it's counterintuitive? What does that mean?
The point. Okay, Jay. So Roger, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? So I think what he's trying to say is that semantically, when you use the word good, right, when it can refer to gassing of children, we will be uncomfortable in saying that this is good. although under your definition, it will be good, right? Because
Yeah,
part of
exactly.
God's, yeah, and this is the counterintuition part. It's not about the contradiction; it's about how we use the terms themselves.
Yeah, so I'm not
When you
using the word
define
good to refer. I'm not using the word good to refer to like it's morally good.
Right.
I'm not
So
using that,
what
I'm
what
using the word good here.
what what
No, but
what we're
this is
doing
how
in
you
moral
used it
philosophy
before.
here
But
is
this
we're
is how
saying
you
No,
that
it
used
is not.
before.
if you
Okay.
have a
So
definition
then
of
that's a
good,
problem. That's a problem. That's a problem then with how you are reconciling my definition in your mind.
no,
It's
no,
not
no.
fine with
So
me
this is the
because if I
critique.
want to say
Okay.
that good, as Rody said, if I define the word good as a chair, okay, and I say that something might be bad, but I use the word good in the sense that it's referring to a chair, okay. Well, it may seem counterintuitive because we're not using the word good in the way that we might normally use it, but it doesn't make it. There's no irreconcilable, or there's no problem here with respect to like a contradiction, because all that's being said here is that we're using a different definition of good. We're not using a definition of good that's saying that it's morally right.
So okay. So when you so again,
So the Holocaust is not morally right. That's not what I mean when I say it's good.
you
That's
just
not what good refers
you
to.
just mean okay. So then again, so it just seems like your view has a lot of conceptual confusion to it. Like that's really unnecessary. It doesn't seem like it's doing work for you. So I think this is a problem with the theory.
No,
And this is
we're just explaining. We're saying that everything that happens is a product of God's exercise of sovereignty. Which is a perfectly useful. That's a useful definition of good, because God is actually morally good in actually exercising his sovereignty.
Okay, so
Okay,
let
but
me
we're
try to pin
we're
this
also
down.
saying
Okay.
that the result by good in a different sense. Now we're saying that good is good insofar as they are contributing to God's sovereign will, right?
Okay,
But
then
not that they're morally good.
let's break
That's
this
not what
down.
we're saying.
So are the things that are exercised okay? So morally good, right? So, I mean, I think maybe this is the point that Rody was kind of bringing up, which is that when I say that something is counterintuitive, it seems like we have a very clear. I'm not going to say clear, like pre-theoretically, we have a decent understanding of what the notion of good is or what the notion of bad is, at least when we're doing applied ethics and whatnot. And it seems like when you wheel in these concepts, we're taking these perfectly intuitive statements, and then all of a sudden, they don't like. We have to say that there's a sense in which the Holocaust is good, and it's
We
like,
don't have
why?
to use the word good then. If that's causing you so much trouble, right? If that's
Yeah,
giving you like
I mean, it
anxiety
seems
or
like a
whatever, we don't
problem
have
with
to use
your
the
view
word
that
good.
you shouldn't have a view where there's a sense in which
I
that's
can
good.
use the word good and bad, and I can use words however I want to use them. Okay.
Yeah,
So
but
you might have an
doesn't
issue.
mean people won't
You might have
criticize you.
the only issue. Yeah, no, that is the only issue you're having is how I'm defining terms and the tokens I'm using to define terms. That's the only
That's
problem
what
you're having.
philosophy is.
Okay.
That's what philosophy is.
So then there's no actual internal problem with my position, then, is there?
No, I mean there is an
Okay,
internal
good, fine. So we can.
there is.
Oh, okay. So then it's more than just how I'm defining the terms then.
Well,
I don't really get the issue here. Like when I was talking about if someone is raped, then they can use their experience to positively impact others. So you could say it's good in that sense, but that's not the same thing as saying rape itself is good. So what is the problem here exactly?
okay, yeah,
No,
I've been
it
talking
is,
about
it is
maybe
to
Rod.
say that. Wait, it is to
So
say.
can I come in for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think that there are two issues here. So the first issue, which is the one that I brought up, was even if you do get a coherent sense of the idea of permissive will being equated with good in some sense, there are two resulting issues. The
No,
first
not
of which,
in some sense. This is the word good is just used as a token to define that term or define that concept. There's no sense or anything. It's just good is just defined. You're just using the word good, G-O-O-D, to talk about that concept. There's no sense or anything in a sense or partially this word may be used. No, it's just the word good is used in this sense, in this context, to talk about this concept. Very simple.
okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll just go.
You
to
keep
the
saying
second.
that, but I haven't heard a single contradiction or problem or tension.
Yeah.
Or anything.
Okay, well, like again, to reiterate a point. I mean, I don't know what philosophy you're reading, but in philosophy,
I don't know what you're reading because you haven't presented a single problem.
I read journal
not
articles.
Successfully.
So the point is that it's very.
Well,
it doesn't happen.
They're not helping you. They're not helping you.
They're not. Well, I mean, whatever non-existent thing you're reading isn't obviously helping you because you're not reading. I mean, the point is that what I'm trying to bring
You haven't
up.
presented a contradiction. You came here to present a contradiction or a problem.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Well, yes. Well, okay. Well, that's been your goal for the extent of this conversation.
So
No,
okay,
so just hang on.
if
been
you're
your
talking
goal for the
about
extent of this
wait,
conversation, right?
if you're talking about presenting a problem, you would have to present like a logical problem, the evidential problem, or an emotional problem. You have to present some sort of problem on some level.
Generally,
it sounds like you're trying to present like some sort of probabilistic problem of evil or something. Is that correct?
No. So let me just go back on this epistemological point. You know, there are three types of ways in which arguments can generally be critiqued, right? So you could have undercutting defeaters, rebutting defeaters, and then you could somehow say that the logic of the argument doesn't work, okay? So rebutting defeater is like, here's some counter evidence. Undercutting defeater is like, I undermine your evidence. Logically fallacious is like, well, here's some contradiction, or here's some fallacy that you've committed, right? So saying, unless you've shown a logical problem with my argument works, is not true. And if you spoke to any logician, they would just say, what are you talking about? I mean, so
not okay.
You haven't presented a problem. So Roger, you haven't presented a problem in my position. You realize
again,
right?
but all you really
no, I have presented a problem that Rody also sees.
All right, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this one last time. Okay, we're gonna do this one last time. Okay, my position is that the Christian God exists. Okay, and that there are certain things that are in accordance with God's permissive will. In fact, all things are in accordance with God's permissive will, and that there are certain things that are out of accord and in accord with God's prescriptive will. Okay, and by permissive will, we're just talking about God's sovereign plan, and by prescriptive will, we're talking about things that God has told us we shall and shall not do. Okay, things like loving God is that which is God says thou shalt love the Lord your God with all thy heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's what Jesus said in one of the Gospels. The 10 Commandments again are another good example of that. Those are things that God has told us, and that's like you'd say that's what God is. That's what good and bad can refer to in that context. Okay, so where is the problem in my position as I just laid it out to you?
And
so the problem
before you go, all I really want to know is it logical? Is it psychological? But go ahead and answer J. Robin's question first.
Okay, yeah. So just in response, I think that the concept in terms of moral analysis of permissive will is either, so there's a dilemma. Either it's doing no explanatory work, or if it is doing explanatory work, it generates really unsavory results, and it seems like we should just get rid of the concept.
Sounds like psychological to me.
Well, that's a genetic fallacy. Like, that's a genetic fallacy.
I didn't. No, sir, stop. I didn't say. I said it sounds like it's psychological.
Okay, Roger, I'm going to have to take you up on that.
I just said my view of what it sounds like. That's all I said. And then genetic fallacy. What?
Roger, I have to take you up. When you say it has no explanatory power, it's the opposite. It has total explanatory power. It has absolute explanatory power.
Right. So, I mean, so it explains why the Holocaust is good, right?
Correct. Again, you're equivocating the word good, but it explains why the Holocaust occurred, right?
No. So wait,
hold on a minute. What explains why the Holocaust is good, Roger?
No. Okay, so let me step back.
Stop. You said that explains why the Holocaust is good. So what do you mean by good, and what is explaining why it's good? What is doing that explaining?
Okay, this is what I mean. What I mean is there's a very easily understandable sense of the word good, unless you're referring to some like functional definition of the word good, which it doesn't seem like you're doing. That's very easily understandable. So when you invoke the idea that like this permissive stuff, whatever is good, like there's no evil in the world, as Rody said, you're now introducing a concept or an interpretation of what the world is that's very bizarre, right? Because what you're suggesting is that there's no evil in some real sense of the term, and so a lot of people would resist that. And so this is not.
I got it. Now, is this so? I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, depending on how you answer this question. Okay, is it counterintuitive to say that everything that happens, assuming that Christianity is true, is in accordance with God's sovereign will? Is that counterintuitive at all?
I'm not a theologian, but sure, I'll go with it. Yeah, fine.
It's counterintuitive?
No. I mean, as in, it's not counterintuitive. I'm the other option.
Okay. So all good means here, let's be clear, when I use the word good, and I'm talking about it in this context, all good means is I'm just saying the exact same thing as I just said there. So there's no counter intuition here with my position. Is there?
No. So yeah, but okay, but here's what we go on.
So then there's no counterintuitiveness.
No.
The only
No,
problem
there is counterintuitiveness. Yeah,
okay,
no, there is.
So how is it the fact that it's counterintuitive if I'm saying the exact same thing except I'm just using a different word?
Okay. So here's what
it sounds like to me, before you answer the question, what it sounds like to me is you're having a problem with how I'm defining terms. So it's not counterintuition here, it's just you just don't like how I'm defining the word good.
No.
But there's no internal problem here.
Okay, Robin, calm down. Calm down. Okay.
There's no problem here with my position.
Okay.
This doesn't exist. We've gone in circles. That's why I'm getting frustrated.
Listen. Okay. So this is a methodological point. You can make as many background assumptions as you want to say, well, okay, yeah, when Alice goes down and she goes down to the hole to Wonderland, if we assume this about that reality and we assume that and we assume that and we assume that, it's not counterintuitive that there could be a smile without a cat on it. And the idea is to say, like, yeah, if you make all those background assumptions, then I suppose it isn't, but why should we buy into those assumptions? Like, there's no, it's very ad hoc. And so just taking that and then, like, hang on, just like, so park that to one side. It just also seems like you're getting to this weird form. If you say that, like, you know, whatever is in accordance with God's decree or whatever he decrees is just, like, by definition good, we get to this weird, like, divine command theory, anti-realist
no, again,
territory.
There it is.
I don't know
there's no divine command theory. There's no divine command theory here, okay? There's no divine... You're, again, equivocating. You're just... I'm going to jump off a building because you're driving me insane, okay? This is exactly the thing I told you not to do, right? What we're talking about here, when I say the word good, is that simply what we're talking about is that we're just talking about God and everything that happens, and whether or not everything that happens is in accordance with God and his sovereign will. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about divine command theory. We're not talking about that.
Okay,
it's not a part of the conversation.
If it's in accordance with his will.
I'm going to mute you. Okay. What you're telling me, if you're saying that it's counterintuitive, okay, that's what you're telling me, okay? It would have to be the case, if what my position is, what I verbalized to you, if it's counterintuitive, it would have to also be the case, then, that everything, assuming that, again, Christianity is true because you're trying to point out an internal problem with me accepting this position, okay, if that is the case, then God letting everything happen, everything that's happening is in accordance with God's sovereign will. That would also have to be counterintuitive, because all me saying that everything is good means is that I'm saying that everything is in accordance with God's perfect will. That's all I'm saying when I say something is good in this context. So in order for me to be saying that something is good, and in order for that to be counterintuitive, then what you would have to be saying is that everything that is a statement, everything that happens is in accordance with God's will. You'd have to also be saying that is counterintuitive. The only other thing you could be saying is that you have a problem with how I'm defining the word good. Okay, and if that's the problem, I don't have to use the word good to define the terms. Okay, but the point of the matter is, conceptually here, there is no internal problem. There is not one. There's nothing here that you presented that's internal.
Well, so I think that there is. Okay, so when you say that everything that's in accordance with God's decree is good, are you saying that if God decreed it differently, it would be good? That those other things would be good?
I don't know if I don't know if there's any if statement about other worlds. I think this is the only world that God created.
No, but this is a contingency question. I'm saying, if God decreed things differently, would those things be good?
In a world where everything that happens in any world that God creates, okay, is considered to be good insofar as it is what God has allowed to happen.
Okay, right? So the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. Again, all good means, this is why I have to keep clarifying, it has nothing to do with the moral value of the state of affairs. It has nothing to do with that. Okay?
Goodness has nothing to do with, okay.
Not as I'm defining it here.
Okay. Then in what sense is it useful to call it good? I mean, like, if it doesn't have a moral connotation and it doesn't have a functional connotation, which are the two connotations that are used to express in English, then I mean, like, what does this mean?
Good. I'll say this again for the dozenth time. Good simply refers to the fact that something is in accordance with God's sovereign will. In this context, there are other contexts in which the word good can be used in different ways. Okay, but in this context, okay, and I don't have to use the word good. I can just say the entire thing. But I would like to, for brevity and also for consistency with what the Christian worldview says,
right?
How they use the word good in certain concepts,
right?
Okay? you can have a problem with the word good all you want to. The point is that you're addressing me and my position. So you have to use the words as I define them.
So
and the
abortion
concepts
is good.
as I define them.
Abortion is good in this context.
So good refers to the fact that something is in accordance with
Right.
God's sovereign will.
So is abortion in accordance with God's sovereign will?
Yeah, everything that happens is in accordance with God's sovereign will.
So abortion is good in that sense.
In the sense that it's in accordance with God's sovereign will.
Okay.
Everything that happens is in accordance with God's
So
sovereign will.
like the Holocaust, abortion, gay marriage, sodomy, those things are all good.
Yeah, I want to be clear.
They're not morally
sense.
good. They're not morally good, but they're
yeah,
in accordance
we
with
have
God's
no
sovereign
problem
will.
with saying the permission of those things, not the things in and of themselves, but the permission of those things are good in that sense. We have no problem.
God is good. God is acting in a moral sense now. God is also acting good in allowing those things to happen. That's perfectly fine.
So it's good for God to allow abortion.
Yeah.
That's right. In that sense.
For God to allow it. Yeah, because God is sovereign. God, we don't have any basis to judge what God allows. The fact is that the thing that God is allowing doesn't have to be good, but God is good in allowing it to happen.
But one day God won't allow it. Right?
Do you remember my
he won't
first?
And then it'll be good.
But that's the thing. God's permissive will is temporal.
Wait, Roger, do you remember my first thing that I said to you in this conversation? That this is just how they define the good in this context. So under their conception, the definition of good is just in the background, and now in the foreground we agreed that this is the definition of the good, and those are the logical entailments of it being the good.
Yeah,
now,
I guess
the point here is not J. Robin. I'm not saying something against you right now. The point here is not to argue about what is the definition in this context, is whether or not this definition is satisfiably applicable to the way we are talking about the good in a univocal way.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I guess what I'm then saying is that collapses back into the first problem that I sort of had, where it just kind of doesn't seem to me that this type of it just doesn't seem like this is using this word in the sense good then just seems to be a complete misnomer. I mean, it doesn't really seem to.
What do you mean a misnomer?
You're saying it's not useful according to...
It's just not a useful concept because everything...
Why is it not useful? Yeah, everything is good.
It doesn't explain anything.
Not
it's just a word. It's just a
I think
word.
It's quite useful.
Yeah, it's a word to describe something else. It's useful, and that's the use it has. Okay.
No,
it's describing a concept.
But if it's
not useful according to what, or not useful according to who?
Well, because it's you're invoking the concept of the word good, which has a very common meaning among most.
Oh, so then good. So then you just have a problem with how I'm defining the word. That's fine. I don't care.
You're not even critiquing the Christian position
because it's not exactly. It's not the actual position. You're like it's not conceptually the position that you're attacking. You're just attacking how we're using words. But that's on for days about attacking. Okay,
but that's a fundamental point.
Okay, look, Roger. I'm going to tell you right now. I don't care if you don't like how I'm defining the word. I don't care. So if you want, if that's what the conversation is going to be for the next 2 hours, we can just stop it right now because I don't care if you don't like how I'm defining the words because that's how the Bible uses the word that way. The Bible uses the word good in certain circumstances in that way, and it's clear when it's being used in that way. Most of the time, it's not being used in that way, but sometimes the word good is referred to, or sometimes the word is good is referring to God's exercise of sovereign.
Okay, so then if it's not about permissive,
so if you don't like,
let's get rid of that. Then you just then it becomes a euthyphro. Then you just have to deal with euthyphro, and then you have to deal with that.
So what's the euthyphro? So are you saying it's arbitrary?
Well, no, because then if it comes to this whole prescriptive issue, then it just seems like you get euthyphro, and that seems like to me to be a pretty
explain the dilemma to me, please. Explain it.
I don't know if I'll try to do this as briefly as I can. It's the idea is something permissive, is something good because God allows it, or does God allow it? Or is something good because God says so, or does he say so because the thing is independently good? And in the first case, it would be arbitrary, and then the second case, it would imply some type of antecedent moral realism. And
there's no moral
say either.
Yeah,
what did he say? Either one of those.
Yeah, what is good is defined as ultimately what is in accordance with God's ultimate will and nature.
Right. So then, if you make that argument, then there's a second order Euthyphro, which I've written and talked about. So the response that you're kind of making is that God makes certain acts, say, like omitting to rape, good because it derives essentially from his nature, so from the idea of lovingness. So the second order problem would be, is there an explanation as to why God's nature, for example, lovingness, forbids rape? And there are two options. So one is yes, there is an explanation.
Wait, what?
And if there is
Lovingness
an
forbids rape? What?
Or like, it's like an aspect of God's nature. That's the ultimate explanation for why things are permissible or impermissible.
Yeah,
right?
God is ultimate. God is the ultimate explanation for everything. God is determinist.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So if there's no explanation as to why his nature,
God is his own. God is. I'll say he's self. There's no explanation external to God. Okay. God is simply himself. Okay?
Right. Then it's arbitrary.
Everything emanates from
then
him.
It's arbitrary.
What do you mean by arbitrary?
Well, it's the same sense of arbitrary because the question is.
No. What do you mean? What do you mean by arbitrary?
So let's say that we say lovingness is a good characteristic for someone.
Stop. Define the term arbitrary. I don't want to hear an example. Define the term arbitrary.
Define the term arbitrary?
Yeah, you just use it. How? What do you mean when you say that?
I think one way to think about arbitrary is without any explanation or reason. But I'm not sure if Roger says have this conception of arbitrary.
There's no external explanation or reason outside of God. But God is his own.
That would be arbitrary by definition.
That would be arbitrary. I mean, I think that
there's no external. If you're just defining arbitrary as there's nothing external to God
to explain
then,
it. Yeah, so it could have been out like so
no,
instance,
that's not no.
Yeah, that's arbitrary.
No, it's not that it could have been otherwise. Now you're extrapolating on from that something else that's not entailed.
Yeah,
so
how is it entailed that it could be otherwise if there is no external explanation of them?
Okay, so put it this way: imagine
the point here is that if God
stop. I asked a question. How is it entailed that because there is no external explanation that it could have been otherwise?
He was about to answer that.
I wanted to answer it right now.
But the point is, it's gonna things when we're trying to elucidate any explanation for anything. It's going to ultimately go back to something of a terminus point, or it isn't. So, if it goes back to a terminus point, then by how you guys are arguing this, you're saying it's arbitrary. Because
if you're just saying it has a terminus point, yeah, like I don't care. Like why should I care? Because you don't like the fact that it hasn't at any point. Good. I don't care. I couldn't care less.
I think it's totally fine to say that it is arbitrary. It's just not very convenient to say so.
If by arbitrary you're just saying that there's no external explanation other than God because God is ultimate and all encompassing. There's nothing that's external to God that would explain it.
So you're not using arbitrary in a sort of negative sense. The way you're saying it seems to be in this. I don't know. To me, it sounds like it's a proprietary use of the word arbitrary. It's a very weird use of it, but if that's the way you want to use the word, I have no problem with that.
Do you think people will reject the idea that arbitrary means without explanation or reason?
Usually it means like when I say usually it means without explanation or reason, and without explanation or reason, it just means that you could pretty much stipulate any explanation or any reason, and it presumably does or doesn't have equal explanatory power. That's usually what the implications of that is.
We're not talking about the explanatory power right now. We're talking specifically about whether what God decrees is good or not. And the point here is that if everything that God decrees is good by the fact that God decrees it, by
even though that was one,
by his nature, right, or by whatever, but by whatever fact of God, the point here is that there is nothing that restricts God from saying or decreeing or having said something else,
because it's not a logical contradiction.
And in virtue, well, not even that. In virtue of that, there could, if you believe that there are different possible worlds, then there could be a possible world where God just decreed something else and it would be good.
Mm-hmm.
And in virtue of that, it is arbitrary because there is nothing that explains, or there is no reason for why God decreed A over B or B over A.
I don't even hold to the view of possible worlds, because I hold that God is the baseline for possibility anyway. So
that's interesting. I have to dip out, but bye.
Yeah, I'm not.
Hey, Goofus, you're an atheist.
I'm asking you.
I don't expect you to say it.
I'm